Is it overnight?
Yes.
Oh, I was in the US, I missed all the drama.
Oh,
I
wow.
came back,
Thank you very much, members of the media, editors, senior correspondents, and journalists. And welcome to this conversation, which is being staged by the African National Congress. And hopefully, President will form part of a series of conversations where the President, wearing the cap and the banner and the logo of the African National Congress, gets to interact on, much more deeply with society, utilizing the services of our clients in the media. The President is here to reflect and exchange ideas with you, but also to reflect on the outcomes of the 3-day National Executive Committee meeting that is about to wrap up. Still in session, but a big part of the work has been done. And with that, Mr. President, I also want to say we are joined here. I was going to read out the number, but it will take up a lot of the time that I am sure fellow media colleagues are keen to get into a Q&A. This is not a press briefing, it's a conversation. So we're going to keep things light, we're going to keep things conversational, but of course we also have to manage the time so that the President is excused at the right time to go and close the National Executive Committee meeting. But I will try and facilitate as best as possible so that everyone has a bite. And so that is that. Having done so, for those that don't know me, my name is Cyril, and member of the National Executive Committee of the ANC and its appointed national spokesperson. With that, let me hand over to the President for his introductory remarks. The President.
Well, thank you very much, Mahlengi. It's wonderful to see such a galaxy of media people. Didn't expect to see so many of you, but it will be good to have a conversation with yourselves. As Mahlengi said, it's just really a fireside type of conversation. We are currently wrapping up the meeting of the National Executive Committee. This doesn't work? Okay. All right. We're currently wrapping up the meeting of the National Executive Committee. NEC, which has really been rich in terms of its content and substance, covering a whole range of issues that are important to the lives of South Africans. We obviously started off with a political overview, which is always given by the President. And in it, I sought to cover the progress that we have made and are making in addressing the priorities that we set out at the January 8th statement. The first priority, as you might recall, was the renewal of the African National Congress and its unity. And the second one was to address the issue of load shedding and bringing load shedding to an end as soon as we possibly can. And the third was to address the issue of the economy and to get all social partners to work together on issues that are pertinent to the growth of our economy. And the fourth one was to attend to the issue of basic services that need to be delivered to the people of South Africa, right across the country, and in the course of doing so to address the local government challenges. And the fifth was to address the issue of crime and corruption. And the sixth one was for a better Africa and a better world. In addressing all these issues, we reflected on the progress that is being made in renewing the ANC. We were all rather pleased with the progress that we are making in making sure that we do renew the ANC and unite the ANC and make the ANC more cohesive. We reflected on how, for instance, various structures of the ANC are beginning to work well, various committees. The NEC is a united NEC and giving leadership to the organization. And the working committee also functions extremely well, and people have taken their tasks very, very seriously on the National Working Committee. And the NEC subcommittees are also meeting on a regular basis and producing really good work that has been presented to the NEC today. And it is very refreshing that we have NEC subcommittees that deal with policy matters, but that go beyond that also deal with implementation issues. And we also looked at the SGO, the real engine of the organization, and we're very pleased to see that our SGO is coordinating the work of the ANC very effectively and seeking to modernize the African National Congress. And of course, we reflected on our leagues, that the leagues are now all set to have their conferences, with the Youth League having had its own after an 8-year lapse or period of not holding, having a real functioning Youth League. The Women's League is now going to follow, and thereafter the Veterans League. And so, as far as the ANC is concerned, we were pleased. We also had the Integrity Commission explaining how it is going to function to the NEC, and we also dealt in part with the terms of reference, which will be finalized later. So in totality, we've now got an ANC machinery that is humming, beginning to gel, and we're dealing with substantive issues, and that speaks to the first priority that the National Executive Committee during the January 8th statement spoke to. We also got a report on issues that have to do with load shedding, and the NEC was rather encouraged to see that the electricity availability factor is continuing to rise and is hovering around 60%, with the incidence of load shedding having been reduced from around 6 now, stage 6 rather, hovering around stage 3, and great progress in stabilizing the ESCOM system, and various units now coming back to operation, and with more like Kusile, which will come back a little earlier than what we had anticipated. So NEC got a sense that we're now grappling with the issues that have been a real bareback and a real concern to the people of South Africa. And we also dealt with the challenge that is looming and out there with regard to transmission. The transmission is under a great deal of challenge and stress, and we therefore need to look at a variety of options, what we do in relation to transmission. Obviously, it requires quite a lot of money. It's been suggested that it could require up to 210 billion rand, and others say it could be 250 billion rand. And with the debt that ESCOM is carrying right now, it's going to be a challenge, as well as the assistance that it has got from the fiscus, and with the fiscus being challenged as well in a number of ways in terms of meeting the needs of South Africans. So we have a problem there, but the good part is that we all resolved that we've got to find innovative ways of addressing this challenge, and we should not sit by and let it slide for years and years, just as we did with the whole issue of generation in the past. So that was discussed, and good discussions in that regard. We then got an input on the economy as well, particularly on the cost of living that is continuing to rise, and what we should start looking at, which we will do so at a government level in terms of what options are there. There could well be options, but that is something that we will need to look at. But then again, we also looked at how we can bolster investments, and we looked at how the reforms are being implemented and what progress is being made, and reflected on the fact that, yes, a number of reforms are now underway. The reforms that are absolutely necessary, particularly in our logistics area, for instance, rail and our ports, and how we can pay more attention to that, but more particularly working with the private sector. And the NEC did note that at government level we've been collaborating with the private sector on how to address some of these challenges, and there's been great cooperation in that regard. Then we looked at the issue of basic services, issue that is of great concern to South Africans: water and sanitation, as well as the roads in various parts of our country, the potholes, and how best the basic services issues can be addressed, particularly how local government can be assisted to address the basic services issue. One of the issues that I did raise is that in the end, with the failures and the weaknesses and the lack of capacity that many of our local governments have, we've got to find a way of giving them support. I reflected rather sadly on the issue of Hammanskraal, for instance, where for the longest time the National Water Department, Water and Sanitation Department, raised the issue of the waterworks at Rooiwal, and very little was done in putting the Rooiwal waterworks in order, and up to and including the National Department even taking that local municipality, the metro, to court. And as we reflected on that, we realized that national government does need to utilize pieces of legislation that we have to intervene, because we cannot leave our people continuing to live in squalor, without water, without proper sanitation, when we know that the local government does not have capacity, it does not have the wherewithal, and we now need to intervene. And we now have a way, one, to engage local government and find a way of cooperating with them, and also to intervene more at the national government level, which is precisely what we're now going to start focusing attention on, rather than just to leave everything to the wiles of local government. In other situations, of course, there's a challenge of money, the budget, but in others it's a capacity issue, it's a capability issue where we now need to find ways of intervening directly. That was broadly supported. We also reflected on what happened in one of our imbizos when the Premier of KZN actually made the call that we now need national government to make more direct interventions to address all these challenges, because much as we expect local government to execute some of their given functions in terms of their areas of competence, they face challenges. They don't have the engineers that are needed. They don't have the capabilities, the staff, and the skills that they need to have. And therefore, The district development model and intergovernmental cooperation needs to be heightened so that we cooperate much more and ensure that services are provided to our people. We dealt, of course, with the issue of crime and corruption, and what was raised more prominently was the spate of criminality that is happening in a number of places in our country, and how we want the police to make more stronger interventions. But we also said that the community policing forums need to be strengthened, need to be empowered, so that they are able to lessen the incidence of criminality, but without saying that the police themselves should not execute their work. And we should also deal with the challenge of the zamazamas, particularly the illegal mining. And that was raised quite strongly, and we are going to be focusing on that and addressing it quite prominently. Then we also dealt with the issue of a better Africa and a better world. And I gave a report on the African leaders' mission to Ukraine and Russia, and I gave them the 10 issues that we raised with the two leaders, President Zelensky and President Putin, and we informed them that our visit was well received. They listened because we set out the 10 issues, and the first one was that, we want them to listen not only to each other, but also to listen to our own African perspective and our own African experience, not that our continent is not dogged by conflicts, but that many of the conflicts that we've had, and even those that we have now, the only solution and the best solution is through negotiation, and we put that across to them, that we're calling for peace, that we would like to see peace because the lack of peace in that part of the world is having a negative impact on us. We see it in the rise of food prices, shortage of grains and shortage of fertilizers. Fertilizers prices have shot through the roof, and we get most of that from that part of the world. And we also said, thirdly, as African nations, the 7 of us, we want to reiterate the principle that every country's territorial integrity should be respected, and in terms of the UN Charter. And we then said that we want to see de-escalation of the conflict, so that the people, in the two countries, the leaders begin to talk. And then we spoke about the confidence building measures, which encompass quite a number of points that are practical in terms of what they can do. We also reflected on BRICS and said that the BRICS summit is going ahead, and we're finalizing our discussions on the format and how it will be held, and that I'm in the course of talking to all the various 4 heads of states in relation to that, and that an announcement will be made in due course. So the NEC has been proceeding very well. And in the last hour or two, we are now going to reflect on how well we have implemented our past manifesto, as tomorrow we begin to reflect on drafting a new manifesto for the forthcoming elections. There's been a very good spirit, a very good mood, and very good cooperation in the NEC. And this also will end up being one of the really better NEC meetings that we have held. So it's been going very smoothly. It's got a lot of meat, a lot of substance, and a lot of real good content in our discussions. And I'm just sorry that as media, you are not able to participate, because you would have seen the real wealth of the way we have our discussions. And maybe next time I'll whisper to the SG to see whether you can't be invited to sit in. But the SG is very, very systematic, and he may not agree to my proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Comrade President. I am going to start to this side. I will suggest that we try and not ask several questions at a time, because we're trying to make it conversational.
And I don't even have a paper and pen, so I won't be able to write, so ask one question each.
So that's my request. And then the President will then respond to, let us say it's Kanita, will then respond to Kanita's question, not in a responding manner. It may very well be, what do you think?
Yeah.
Conversational. So over to you, Kanita, and then after that I will go to Mr. Beje.
Yeah. That's very good. I'll give. No. I'll give you the mic.
No, of course not. This is my culture that's not acceptable. Mr. President, thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for the ANC for arranging such. We really appreciate it. I'm interested in the conversations going towards the elections, and obviously coalitions has been the flag word. And this week we saw, conversation or word around something happening in a local government sphere, which is in Ekurhuleni, when ANC leader, basically expressed that an arrangement the ANC has with the EFF is not yielding any positive outcomes there. And there's so much of instability we've seen through this marriage of convenience the ANC has with the EFF in unseating in different municipalities and communities. So, if you could just talk a little bit about, the complicity of the ANC in the instability we see in local government, and then how do you fix that, and how do you sell an alternative narrative to citizens when a lot of the problems that we see is kind of, you can point directly to the instability that has come about because of the swapping in of governments there, and then if I could just take the opportunity one time to just BRICS announcement on whether President Putin is going to be here. Is that the announcement that we're going to get this week? Thank you very much.
Well, we are concerned about the instability, particularly in local government, of the coalition arrangements that have been crafted all around. It has led to a lapse in service delivery because parties have been more jostling for positions and in some cases promoting their own interests. And this, in a number of places, it is happening at the expense of service delivery and serving our people well. So it is concerning. And of course, this is a result of what the citizens of our various cities and metros decided as they voted. So this is now what we have. Now, coalitions are always difficult to manage, and we've come to learn from those countries, particularly in the Northern Hemispheres, that have been managing coalitions for a long time. In other cases, they struggle to form governments for periods of up to a year because they struggle to find commonality and consensus on interests and how people should be positioned. And in one case, I was told that a coalition agreement ran up to 500 pages because they had to look at every little aspect. Now, our coalition arrangements have not yet reached that level, and sometimes they are strategic, sometimes they are tactical, and sometimes they are interest-driven. And we do need to mature to a point where if the citizens have decided in whatever way to support various parties, we are able to settle down and form government structures that will function and that will, one, give certainty and confidence to our people, but also that will result in better services being delivered. And that is the reason why we are going to be looking at a legislative framework that should govern coalitions, whether parties should reach a particular threshold before they are able to participate in a government process. So we are still taking baby steps in the formation of coalitions, and it's bound that we are going to make mistakes. And the unfortunate part is when mistakes are made that have a negative impact on our people. And I am just hoping that we can all work to a point where we don't craft coalitions at the expense of the interests of the people. Service delivery must continue. It must not be weakened as we put together these coalitions. The issue of making an announcement at a later stage about BRICS is not really going to revolve around that. It's just going to give information to South Africans about the importance of BRICS and what it is going to mean, not only to our own country in terms of promoting our interests, but also to the continent, because we're pivoting this BRICS summit more around BRICS being used as a lever and an instrument to advance the development of our continent. So we will be giving more information about that, and also hoping and wishing that we have a very successful BRICS summit when it finally happens, when we will have so many countries visiting our country to attend the BRICS summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do apologize for the roving mics are following. We can, so that we can address the situation of the mics.
Okay, thank you very much, Mahlengo. Good afternoon, Mr. President. Just 2 questions. The one is on law enforcement. You actually touched on the question I was going to ask about illegal mining, but it obviously is predicated on the criminality and how we are enforcing the laws as a country. You know, we're having something called construction mafia. We're having something called zamazamas, illegal mining. And the NEC, as you have said, has reflected on those things. The questions I think South Africans would want to know, other than you as the governing party, the ANC, reflecting and speaking about them, what is it that you are doing practically to make sure that you can't have a school that was started in 2020, Mr. President, still not finished because some people just want a share. We're speaking about the Zamazamas now, just about 5 kilometers from where we are, where people were, I mean, they had to inhale that gas, whatever it is, and then they died. And let's not forget what happened in Krugersdorp. So what is it that you are doing as the governing party, as government? Because speaking about it just really is not cutting it with South Africans. I think they'd want to see something practically happening. Perhaps quickly on BRICS, I know my colleague did ask. I'm getting a sense that we may be moving towards a virtual BRICS. Is my characterization correct?
Thank you. On the issue of criminality and the Zamazamas, absolutely right to be raising these issues, and they have been ventilated a lot also in the NEC and indeed in society as a whole. And we have been with the police and other security forces from intelligence and all that, been working on how we are beginning to deal with this problem and this challenge. Now, they are different these problems. And of course, there's the construction mafia that proliferates in many parts of the country. And some do it on the quiet. They approach contractors and say, we want 30%, we demand it, and you can buy us out. They've become as brazen as all that, and it happens on the quiet, and some people speak out, and sometimes they just storm the construction site, and there are many construction sites around the country. And we've are working on this, and there's a team in the police that is focusing more and more on these. It's organized crime that manifests itself through pouncing on construction sites and building sites. And the illegal mining process, I have said that it's not only a policing process, but I want all the departments that are involved with the labor, with the minerals and energy to also get involved, so that we approach it as a joint program or process from government side. And we will be seeing change sooner rather than later, because we've got to address this, and the sports are known. And of course, you cite the very most unfortunate incident that happened here in Ekurhuleni, but there was another one in the Free State where 31 miners are said to have died underground, and it could even be more. So these challenges proliferate, but we are addressing them, and we will come down very hard on those who are involved in criminality, and the might of the law and the state will be felt, because it goes against what we stand for, law and order, and this is a challenge that we've got to address very, very, very firmly. We are not going to have a virtual BRICS summit. We are going to have a physical BRICS summit, and all of us are committed to having a summit where we will be able to eyeball each other. We have not held a physical summit for quite a long time, almost 3 years now, and so sorry to disappoint you. It's not going to be virtual.
Thank you very much, President. It seems the end. So I am looking for people who are going to move the mics. In the meantime, I'm going to do it.
Afternoon, Mr. President. Thanks for this engagement. It's Ziyanda Ngobo from Northern Africa. You've been on a renewal process for quite some time now. You've just remarked about how your NEC is united, you're sort of coalescing around issues and pretty much moving in the same direction. But Mr. President, we continue to see reports about fractures here and there. I mean, my colleague Khotato Madisha released a report today about you. Firstly, I want to know, will you be disciplining your chair?
Who's Khotato here?
Khotato's in there. Over the signing of an MOU. I know that this is about ANC issues, but this speaks to cohesion. But also, as a part of your renewal process, it was about dealing in the main with your deployees to government and issues of state capture. Are you concerned about the type of people that your deputy president is surrounding himself with, if reports are anything to go by, some of whom have been implicated in issues of state capture? But on top of that, someone who's deemed as a close ally of yours, Mr. Bejane Chauke, this week releasing a statement talking about fake WhatsApps going around, that he's part of a plot to undermine the office of the deputy president. What are your thoughts on that? And just, I'm really pushing it a bit, this is my thing, but your reaction to the outcomes of the Phala Phala report.
I still want to request that hopefully I am audible. But I still want to request that we keep it to one question at a time, so that the President can agree to come back again. There will always be another chance.
You misbehaved.
So let's stick to it, colleagues. Just one question so that he has a chance to apply himself to that specific one, and then we'll continue to do it that way, if that's okay. Thanks very much. I see Khutazo agrees, so.
I now know who Khutazo is. No, on the last point, I've noted the PP's report, and that's just as far as I've noted it. So that's what it is. The unity is a process. We are not where we would like to be, but we are on the way to being a united organization. The divisions that have dogged us in the past are busy melting away as we embrace renewal, as we embrace unity, and as we embrace the rebuilding of the ANC and improving our brand and dealing as openly as possible with the problems and the challenges that have beset our organization in the past. So unity and renewal should never be seen as a one-day event. There will be ups and downs. There will be forward movement and reversals. But we are moving forward. The forward movement on the way to a united ANC and a renewed ANC, as I said at the January 8th statement, it's irreversible and irrevocable. We are moving forward and embracing one another in a much more effective way in the way that we deal with issues and the way that we deal with each other. And of course, you refer to the issues of the deployees, and Khutazo chose to write about what he perceived are disjunctures. Let me say, we're making a mountain out of a molehill, really, here. It's been suggested that when Minister Mantashe was not at the signing of the agreement, MOU rather, when the Dutch Prime Minister and the Danish Prime Minister were here, it was a big snub and a big deal. It wasn't. And things were moving very quickly, and people in his department and other departments and the presidents were moving very quickly. And as he has said, he hadn't really read the agreement. But the agreement, the MOU, was signed by government. So government has signed that. And that is the best commitment that we want. It is the government of the Republic of South Africa that signs these issues. And agreements don't always have to be signed by, specific people. We delegate a number of other people to sign those. And then it is said that there is a rupture, as you said, between those who are deployed on policy matters. And I should tell you that Minister Mantashe is the one minister who has signed more renewable IPPs than any other. He has signed them by the bucket load, signifying his commitment to government policy, because government policy on renewables continues, and people are deployed to further that policy. So there's no issue. The issues that you raise about the Deputy President and the people that relates to, he has answered, and he will be able to answer that as well. Some of the people are not known to me, but I'm sure you are able to have that type of conversation with him. And I have not had any inkling whatsoever that there's any form of criminality or whatever. So you should ask him that. You refer to Bejani Chauke's WhatsApp. There's been quite a usage of abuse, rather, of WhatsApp numbers. Mine was also utilized improperly. And I think we did issue a statement to that effect, because all of a sudden I found that my WhatsApp number and my photograph was being used to solicit money from a number of people. And one of the people who was my friend called me and said, I just received this message from you. And I said, what message? He said, but in the message I'm supposed to do A, B, C, D about money. And I said, but I never sent you that message. Then we realized that my number was being abused. And we are in the process of looking at all that. So this social media stuff and all that, it's utilized in various nefarious ways, and that is precisely what I also went through. Thank you.
Thank you, President. I will go in this order. Sorted now. Okay, Tidi.
Thank you, Tidi, my dear, from Eyewitness News. Can I just, it is on.
Yes, it is on. I can hear you, Tidi.
I can hear you.
Tidi, don't worry. If I hear you, that's all you need.
Please proceed. Once Tidi has interacted with the President, I'm just going to switch things so that we cover everyone from this end, not in that chronological. I'll come to newsroom, and then we'll just do this and do that so that we afford everybody a chance.
Okay. Just very, very quickly, before I even ask my question, can I just, we wouldn't ask a flurry of questions if we had these engagements regularly, as promised by the President himself. So the issue becomes that, and when you blackmail us and say, you must ask Arno, we won't have another one, ask one or not have another one, that's unfair. I just want to put that out there to you, Sis Mahlengi. That's unfair.
It's not. Please ask the question.
Carry on, Tidi.
Carry on, Tidi.
But you heard me, that's unfair.
Oscar Susandwa.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to not. Anyway, I hear what you're saying to Zianda about the deputy president. He's told City Press that he believes he's being pushed out of office. What is your sense of what's actually happening there? Even if you are not engaging him regularly, you must be able to be reading reports. What is your sense of what's happening? Secondly, I'll only just ask you, I'll hold the others. Former President Thabo Mbeki, I was speaking to him about a month ago, and I said, you know, you came out campaigning for the ANC recently. Will you be campaigning again in 2024? And he said, it's a legitimate question that he cannot answer, because there are many things that are going wrong that are not being attended to as well as they should be. That feels like an indictment on this leadership of the ANC. Your reaction to that, please.
President.
Well, I also saw the report of the City Press, and I had a discussion with the Deputy President, and I said, but what is this? And we are going to have another discussion because, and I immediately said to him, I appointed you, and I'm the only person who can de-appoint you, and there is just no thought, no plan, no inkling whatsoever that something like that could be in the works. And I would have, you know, to have my own head examined, to have had a deputy president appointed, and thereafter, because I'm the only one who could remove him, unless the party decides so, and then do that. So there is no truth or substance to that at all, as far as I'm concerned. The issue of former President Thabo Mbeki being asked whether he will campaign, and I think, I mean, there are a number of issues that we have been in conversation with him on, and we will continue to do that. And he's a revered and respected leader of our organization, and matters that have to be discussed will be discussed. And of course, we would like, you know, as many of our leaders as possible to participate in the forthcoming elections, and we will be campaigning very hard, and hopefully with as many leaders as possible. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, President. I now turn to Lukhanya.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. President. Lukhanya Talata from Newsroom Africa. Mr. President, I completely concur with my colleague around the issue of access to you, and I think to a large extent your cabinet as well and your government ministers. I think it sometimes becomes very hard for us to be able to tell the real story to South Africans, just simply because we don't have access. Or by the time that we are able to get through, it's 2 to 3 days after the fact, and we then miss that opportunity for us to be able to do our job, which is largely to inform South Africans. So we would appreciate going forward, Mr. President, that that this becomes a much more regular engagement and that we are able to have access to you on a much more regular basis. Now, just on my the issue around my question, you raised the issue of transmission of ESCOM, and obviously, hopefully, lessons having been learned from the generation side. So now the transmission is going to cost a lot of money, around 250 billion. There's the issue of rails and ports, ANCYL. The real issue, and then you also mentioned something about capacity as opposed to capability. That's going to be very worried because those are two different things. Hopefully, on another occasion, we'll be able to engage properly, because if we don't have capacity, we can hire the people. But if the people that get hired don't have the capability, then we've got a serious problem. But the issue, Mr. President, that I want to raise is just how much, how serious is the ANC taking the issue of accountability within, particularly those within government? Because the issue of ANCYL, there were many warnings that were issued about that situation, but still it was allowed to happen and people died. So in terms of accountability, we need to be able to hold you a lot more accountable. So that's why I'm asking for a lot more regular engagements with you and the government. But also the ANC itself, what is it doing around the issue of accountability? And are we going to start seeing a lot more people being held accountable? Because corruption, if I'm afraid of being held accountable, I'm not going to get into corrupt acts, basically. So just around the issue of transmission and the issue of accountability, please, Mr. President. I'm sorry for being long-winded. Thank you.
Quite long-winded, Kanye. Maybe on the first one, yes, the issue of access. We will gear up the accessibility so that you are able to report to South Africans about what we are doing in government. And also it speaks to the accountability aspect, that it is through that we are able to be accountable. So full agreement on that aspect. On the transmission issue, and as I said, we need to come up with a number of innovative ways. It's a big ticket item to improve the transmission of the grid, or to improve, yes, the grid, that is transmission. So we are going to have to come up with innovative ideas, and some of them would be partnering with the private sector, where the money resides, and finding ways of doing so and without diluting or minimizing the ownership of the grid by the people of South Africa, because the grid essentially belongs to the people of South Africa, as managed by the state. So other countries have been able to do quite a lot of innovative things when it comes to improving their own transmission and grid. And by the way, many other countries around the world are also facing exactly the same problem. We focus attention on the generation side, And now we have to face attention, place attention on the grid or the transmission. So a number of options then have to be explored, and we're raising it so that we should not be alarmed at what we need to do. It's an enormous ask, but it's something that has to be done. It's possibly much more serious than the generation part itself, because it's going to cost so much more money, but we've got to find innovative ways of dealing with that. And it's got to be done almost immediately. ESCOM has already said as much. On the issue of accountability of people who are deployed, you're absolutely right. We need to improve accountability. You're absolutely right when it comes to capacity. Yes, we've got to increase the capacity, and it revolves around skills. It revolves around making sure that people have the know-how, but capability is, as you say, a different matter. And when it comes, for instance, to the Hammanskraal, the matter was raised on a number of occasions with the metro, and not much was done. And that becomes a political problem which needs to be addressed. And that's where accountability has to be put in place. And for us, as we move forward, we've got to have the right people doing the right jobs, and also through professionalization of the civil service and improving our accountability processes, we should be able to ensure that things get done a lot better. It's been the case in the civil service that, yes, even as people have not been able to perform their tasks, nothing much flows, nothing much happens, not leaving out at the political level. So we've got a number of areas that we need to pay attention to. And we are going to do so, because the realization that it militates against the interests of our people has become patently clear. Not that it wasn't clear in the past, but it's something that we've got to address, and we will address it more effectively right now to avoid a situation like a Hammanskraal. And so we've got to address it at a number of levels. Firstly, to address it through governmental intervention processes. We've got to intervene, but at the same time, deal with lack of performance. And a combination of all that should then be able to help us. And to deal with, say, pure negligence and recklessness as well as dealing with things like not spending money, because some of the challenges are that people are afraid to sign off when it comes to having to spend money, because they're afraid to make mistakes. And so those are some of the things that we need to deal with. So it's a plethora of things, but we are going to be addressing it. And the more we improve the intergovernmental relationships, the more we will be able to have a number of buttons that we can press just to address these types of problems.
Thank you, President. I'm going to turn to John Bailey.
Mr. President, thank you for this opportunity. I just have two questions that I would like to ask you. Today, it's exactly 2 years since we've seen widespread looting, especially in KZN and also in Gauteng. It was almost an orchestrated insurrection that we saw, and the impact economically that had on the country, and also especially on small-scale businesses in the country. And this morning, only one person has been sentenced so far, somebody who went to steal food from Woolworths, and nobody else has been arrested. This morning again, we saw 6 trucks being set alight on the Van Rynen's fast, and immediately that had an impact on the economy and the flow of traffic in that area. So my question is really one that, because it does seem as though it's economic sabotage that we see taking place in this country. How concerned are you about this? Because it's fascinating for me that our intelligence services and our police were not aware of what happened this morning. Because surely there's talk out there. Somebody must know what's happening. That's the one concern that I have, or question that I want to raise with you. And then the second one is, you spoke about the need for direct intervention from national when it comes to local government. How do you see this play out? Because a lot of our difficulties that we have in South Africa, it's happening on local government level. It's the service delivery and the type of people deployed to some of these areas that are not working for us. So how long before we're going to see some changes happening on local government?
Thank you very much. I must just, before you respond, President, we've already hit the hour mark, and I know that if we stopped here, President, I will have a massive protest. So I will request your indulgence to detain you. Thank you, President.
I will stay for 30 more minutes. Oh, 30, okay. Yeah, no. Yeah, no, 30, yeah. Okay. Okay.
Sunday, don't want us to be.
Yes, I am concerned about these activities that take place that have a negative impact on our economy, and it's almost like economic sabotage, because burning 6 trucks on the main artery of our country in terms of the economy is concerning. The intelligence agencies are going to be giving me a report on that, so we will be getting that shortly, and of course the police themselves will be taking steps to make sure that we forestall whatever follow-up activity that those who are behind this may well be planning. But we are going to ensure that we go after those people who torched those trucks, because it's not acceptable that trucks and facilities that are enhancing our economy are attacked willy-nilly just like that, and they should never actually even be attacked. So it is a real concern. When it comes to the challenges that local government faces, we want to promote more and more the district development model, which talks to intergovernmental cooperation. We want to heighten that so that there's more cooperation. No government entity, be it local, provincial, and national, should ever think that it can do things on its own. And this is precisely the message I've been stressing, even at national level, that no government department or minister must think that they can work in a silo and just do things on their own without being aware that it affects a whole chain of other processes. So to enhance intergovernmental cooperation, we want national to have a hawk's eye on what is happening. What comes as a real concern to me is often getting reports that budgets have not been spent, and some of the money is money that would have been allocated to local government as either their equitable share as well as the grants that they should utilize for infrastructure. And when that money is not spent, it basically means that it was money that was available but could not be spent at the expense or to the detriment of ordinary people where those towns or cities are. So that is the reason why we want to focus more attention on, one, how we can have a proper analysis of what's happening, two, support our local government entities, and where they have challenges, capacity or otherwise, how we can intervene and support them and help them. Because by so doing, we are addressing the needs of our people more broadly. So we will want to up our game when it comes to that, so that we begin to address those things. Many of the things that we have done from a national perspective have worked rather well. For instance, the presidential employment stimulus was coordinated nationally through the various departments, and it worked extremely well. There was no corruption, and it led to almost employment opportunities of some 800,000 to 1 million people. And similarly, a variety of other interventions, and which showed and proved that when national, provincial, and local work together, we're able to move mountains and achieve a great deal. And similarly, in this case, for instance, if the water challenge in Rooiwal and Hammanskraal, be it the water challenge in eThekwini, or Msunduzi, or anywhere, if we are able to work together in full cooperation, we'll be able to resolve those. So I'm looking forward to this new, if you like, era of being able to together, utilizing the new method that we've got now, the district development model, breaking down the silos and being able to work together much more effectively, we will be able to achieve a great deal. So I'm focusing, and in the next few months, we should be able to see appreciable change. It may not happen all over the country at one go, but it's a process that as we've been testing, and we're finding that it has a great deal of efficacy and it has a great deal of effectiveness as well.
Do you remember, colleagues, that with the time that's been extended, the president still has to claim her own spot in firing his own questions to members of the media, should he elect to do so?
Yes, I'm going to.
He's allowed to.
And I'm going to take Masego over there. So I'm just doing a zigzag. I see the look from Lize Gatandwa. And let's try and keep our questions brief so that everybody has a chance to bite. Because after this extension, it won't be possible to extend it further.
Yes.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to say, Mr. President, you spoke very well in Paris.
Oh, okay.
And it links directly to my question on geopolitics.
Yeah.
Seemingly, you are being perceived and your administration to be more aligned to the East rather than the West. What brings about the foreign policy that you are trying to drive? Because it seemingly looks like in this latter part of this administration, you are more focused on international relations as opposed to when you started off as the president of the country, president of the African National Congress. How do you inform this perceived change of perspective and change of view from your side, from the West and shifting towards the East? Are you perhaps seeing or thinking that the East is the future and the West is a thing of the past, looking at the current economic turmoil that the West is going through and more industrialization taking place within Eastern countries? Then lastly, Mr. President, on the issue of BRICS, it's not for the first time you've spoken about a new currency. When you first came into power, you spoke about Africa using one currency, which was the philosophy of the late Muammar Gaddafi. Are you still of the same inclination that the dominance of the dollar is detrimental to the African continent and other countries at large in the world? Thank you.
We've always focused our attention on our foreign policy, right from the beginning when I became president. And to this end, we've participated in a number of initiatives. And I guess our role during COVID in leading the African continent as chair, in many, many ways, defined our approach, because our approach has always been Pan-African, has always been advancing the interests of our own continent, and sometimes some people say maybe the expense also of our own country, but we advance the interests of South Africans first, and thereafter we say a better Africa and a more prosperous Africa. And as we do so, we are acutely alive to the fact that we've got to interact with the rest of the world, because our own country and indeed our continent is not an island. We have to work within a domain of the world, and for the longest time the world has been dominated on a unipolar basis. It's now becoming more multipolar, and we as South Africa have to relate to the various polarities in the world, polities in the world, if you like, and work with them. So during COVID, it was largely working with our own continent, as well as working, yes, with both the East and the West, and we were able to get assistance when it came to PPEs from the East largely, but also from the West. When it came to vaccines, we had to go and argue our case together with India at the World Trade Organization, and interacted with a variety of countries. So and when the war in Ukraine started, because of the position that we took, which is a position that many have come to understand more, position that said conflicts such as this should rather be resolved through negotiation rather than through might and force. The appreciation is growing, although we were pillared and criticized on the stance that we took at the United Nations. And we were not the only country that took a position of saying that we are non-aligned, but of course, because of the role that we play in the geopolitical situation, we were singled out. But much as we have been singled out, together with 6 other countries, we decided that we are going to play a particular role to advance that neutrality. So people have tended to want to paint us into a particular corner, the East, and at times, as you might recall, we've also been painted as being more pro-West, but we've always said that we are non-aligned, and our non-aligned status means that we relate to all countries in the world. And even in times of war, we have seen ourselves playing a role in various parts of the world, advocating the peace option, as we have done now. So we will deny the fact that we are more East rather than being more West. We are non-aligned, and that gives us a very unique position, which many have started to appreciate. A unique position in that we can talk to all sides. This was initially also appreciated by even President of the United States, who said, you can talk to President Putin. And indeed, as we have gone out, we've spoken to both sides, Zelensky and Putin, and both of them have found us acceptable. And they found us to be interlocutors that they can deal with, and honestly and openly. And that is a position that can only really be properly occupied by a party or a country that has decided on a particular cause, which is that non-alignment. And I guess this we've learned from the great Nelson Mandela, because that was his approach also to international relations. He was able to talk to all parties, whether they were in a conflict or not. And this is the policy position that we intend to pursue going forward, because we've seen how beneficial it is. One of the important outcomes of our engagement on the Ukraine-Russia war is that both presidents have agreed to continue engaging with us. They're going to continue engaging with us. There are certain things that President Zelensky has asked us if we could do, and similarly President Putin. And we find that that is an important role we can play to hopefully contribute to the peacemaking process. So in the end, I think it's an important role that we can advance. And with the geopolitical situation being as fluid as it is now, we believe that it's important that a country like South Africa should be able to play its long-stated role. This position is not new. It emanates from way back, and it's been consolidated and strengthened now because of the challenges that we're having to grapple with. There was another subsidiary question you asked.
It's about the one currency.
Oh yes, the issue of the currency. Yes, we have said that we need to get to a point where Africa, as Africa integrates and unites, should have one currency, and we've had that being advocated by a number of people. When we were in Paris, President Lula da Silva, President of Brazil, raised the issues about the dollar, and he said, this needs to be discussed. And I said, well, this is an issue that should, yes, become a topic also in the forums that we are going to be holding going forward. So it is a matter that needs to be discussed, and it's not an issue that is going to find an easy solution right away. It's a more long-term issue, and it's a matter that we should not deal with as though it's a holy cow. It needs to be discussed, just as we have to discuss an African currency issue.
Thank you, President. I'm told that I'm left with 15 minutes. I'm going to turn to Liseka, and you are now, the other colleagues who wish to say something to the President are now at the mercy of Liseka in terms of the questions have got to be short in order to get the other colleagues who still wish to speak before we can release the President and take the President's own last question if he so wishes, which I do hope you will, President.
I will.
And so let's try and keep it brief. I'm sure I tried to extend the time, but I can't go beyond this. Please proceed.
I'll try to be brief. Mr. President, you're speaking to Dizega Tandwa from the Leon Guardian. Mr. President, you've often been called indecisive. Some people have said that you frustrated various stakeholders, business, and internally in the ANC, some have said that the inclusion of an electricity minister was not necessary. In fact, this was done to allay some of your allies, Gwede Mantashe, Pravin Gordhan, for instance. You're going into the last tail end of your term. Would you say that this has worked for you in terms of you being so process driven and not really getting into a situation where you decide, as many have asked you to? Would you say that this has worked for you? Accountability, Mr. President, not only relates to government, but it also relates to the private sector as well. What I want to find out from you in terms of the private sector, I say this because recently we had a sit down with Sihle Zikalala, your Minister of Public Works, And he gave us quite startling figures, one of which is that Eastern Cape and the Northern Cape have a backlog of about 3,000 schools that have not been built, which would be about 68 years, he said, to build them, and it would be in the tune of 70 billion. And this would be drastically reduced if private sector would come, would meet you halfway. Why is it that you haven't been able to meet halfway with the private sector? I'll leave it at that for now.
The issue that you raised about this issue of being process-driven, there's nothing wrong with process. If you're disturbing Lisa, she's listening. There's nothing wrong with process, and I've often said that you need to look at what I call PSPs. It's people, systems, and process. You look at how people are deployed and whether they are deployed in a way that they will do the work that they should, and set in place the systems that will enable them to be effective. And once that has been done, to have a process which is predictable, which will enable things to get done. So yes, I do lay emphasis on process, because that is a guarantee that things will continue being done, rather than sort of one-shot type of interventions that end there, and you haven't set up a system and a good process to get things done more effectively. When those people that you talk to, for instance, I'll give you a good example. When I decided that to address our electricity challenges, I needed somebody who would be focused, who would be able to spend every hour of the day, every hour, on just electricity. And I decided that I wanted an electricity minister. I didn't consult anyone. I said, I'm the president, I'm deciding that this is what will work for us. And that's when people said, you didn't consult, you didn't ask us, you didn't come to us. I said, oh, now when I say I want things done, you want to revert to that system that you said you didn't like, of too much consultation. So there are moments when, yes, you've got to be able to take decisions and move on. There are moments when you've got to consult. And I've utilized both, where I've said, on this one, I am going to move forward. And if you have any issues or complaints, we'll deal with them while the train is moving. And that's precisely what I have done. And it was not to protect anyone. It was just to get the work done. And I did say right at the beginning that I am going to divide the work that needs to be done in as far as energy is concerned. Minister of Minerals and Energy will continue to focus on the regulatory part. That he must do. And the Minister of Public Enterprises will continue to focus on the governance part of the entity that should deliver electricity to us. And then Minister of Electricity must focus on the work that needs to be done to ensure that generation does indeed happen, and we get out of the load shedding that we have. And now all of these are bearing fruit, and people never pause to think about that. They never pause and say, wow, you were right, because things are moving forward. And as far as the regulatory framework is concerned, we are going to be issuing another round of IPPs. That is on the way, and the regulations are being done as far as the reforms that we focused on. On the governance side, the restructuring of Eskom is happening into generation, transmission, as well as distribution, and all that is happening, and including the setting up of a structure that will coordinate our state-owned enterprises. And on the electricity side, Minister Ramaphosa is just running with the ball and getting to a point where we now realize that we've got to deal with transmission a lot earlier. ESCOM has always been given almost the sole responsibility of dealing with transmission. And now we're saying it is much broader. It's a national issue. It just does not reside in ESCOM alone. So that realization has now been brought firmly to our faces because we've got a focused minister on transmission. So had I listened to all these noises of consult, this and that, we wouldn't be where we are. And I've given leadership, and yes, you wanted to be led, because we are moving forward now, and we are going to get things done. On the issue of accountability, you asked the question, what was it? Oh yes, the private sector. Yes, the private sector obviously has to be mobilized to work with us. The issue of, say, for instance, schools. Responsibility for building schools has always been a government type of role, including your other social infrastructure facilities like hospitals and all that. But more and more we are now saying we need as much help as we can, including coming up with financial innovative ways of shortening the period that we need to have to build all the schools that we should have in our country. It's 68 schools, for instance, for the Northern Cape. It's 75 years that it will take us for the schools in Limpopo. So we say there must be, and there are ways in which we can mobilize finance, and the private sector can also play a role in all that. And you ask the question, why have we not been able to succeed in doing so? We've been working with the private sector on a number of issues, and but we need the private sector to put more and more shoulder to wheel. And there are a number of financing options that they can participate in, which I want them to be part of going forward.
Thank you, President. I'm advised that we are left with 5 minutes, and so I'm only going to take just one question. You raised your hand earlier. Is it down? If you covered, I'm happy. Then I can take my brother over there. No, you're having a brainwave, so I'll take my brother over there. That will be the last question.
Can I propose
you put your hand down and then it went up and down. So it's not on us. No, I've given my brother there.
I'm saying, can you trap the question within the question?
In 2 minutes, we can do that. That's a useful suggestion. So
I'll try to be brief.
depends on how he becomes brief as well.
Okay. My name is Saeed. I'm from Phoenix TV, China. And my question is, we've seen there's an increasing interest of a lot of countries around the world to attend the upcoming summit here in South Africa.
Yeah.
As well as I saw the news last night that all of the African head of states have been invited to attend the summit as well. So, and South Africa is playing a critical role now at the international stage. My question, Mr. President, what is going to be different in this summit?
Well, thank you very much. That's noted. I'm going to go in that order. City Press. We're really keeping it short and sweet now.
Thank you so much. My name is Norman Masongwe from City Press. To follow up on that one quickly, is that how far are you with the engagement with President Putin? Because our understanding is that the ball is in your court since he wants to attend, and India was against the summit to be taken somewhere else. And then maybe the last quick one is that how do you the release of the Parapara report ignited the accusation, or the accusation of
How do you respond to such criticism that you are using the law enforcement agencies to wage your war?
The last question, one question from Kutazo, and then we close. President responds, the president then closes by firing on off his own question. One question, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, my name is Mawande. I work for the Sunday World. Mine is really short and simple. When you came in, there was this whole euphoria and talk of a new dawn, but I mean, many things should have worsened since then. Unemployment, load shedding, I may go on and on, but because of time, I'll limit it to those as an example. What's the new dawn a false dawn? And going forward, how do you salvage the situation? You've been in office now for going for 6 years. You are probably left with another 5 years, of course, depending if the ANC believes that you are the right guy to take them forward. How do you salvage the situation, and what kind of legacy do you leave behind as President Cyril Ramaphosa? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kutazo?
Potato Manis at the Sunday Times. President, have you had time to reflect or engage around what took place in Poland? Maybe let me just keep it there. Journalists being stopped, accusations of ammunition on plane, and all of that. Have you had time to engage? And frankly, what is your view around what took place there? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We then end at that note. President?
Sure, I didn't write any of these, and you fired too many. Okay, what is going to be different with this summit? I guess what's going to be different is the interest that is being shown by so many countries who want to be present. The other one is, and you didn't ask the question, a number of countries want to join BRICS. Up to 11 or 12 countries want to join BRICS, and that is what is different. And we're going to reflect on that, and we often take decisions by consensus. So that is going to be a different take. And of course, the geopolitical situation now in the world calls for us to reflect on what is happening in the world, because we're no longer dealing with suppositions or things that could happen. We're dealing with an existential type of situation that is unfolding right in front of our eyes. So we're going to have to talk to all that. And of course, the other thing that will be different is the immediate needs of our continent for development, for support, for finance in pursuing prosperous futures for the continent, particularly in a world that is now driven by new technology as well as climate change. So those are things that are going to be very, very top of the agenda at the summit as we get together. Then
we had, and in no particular order, the one about the promise of a new dawn.
Oh yes, yes, yes. Yes, I've often given quite a lot of thought also to that. And the period that I became president has possibly become the most challenging period that any president in democratic era has ever faced. No other president has gone through or has faced the challenges that not only I face, but the whole country faces. And the other day I was counting the various challenges. They came to about 14 that have really been so huge as to impede our way to move forward. State capture, none of my predecessors dealt with. And state capture, in more ways than one, really broke down the capability of the state in a variety of ways, to a point where various institutions of state, having been broken down, could not function as they should have. And when you are leading in a situation like that, you don't immediately have a silver bullet. You don't immediately have a wand to wish all those things out. You've got to painstakingly work at all those challenges to rebuild institutions that were completely captured, broken down, and you're dealing with the people, you're dealing with processes, you're dealing with all. And these are key institutions that should play a key role. For instance, when it comes to state-owned enterprises, the capital investment in our country has largely been driven by the investment of state-owned enterprises. And they were broken down. The rail ones, the port ones, and you name them. And therefore, you were really starting from ground zero. And none of my predecessors had to deal with that. Then you had COVID. Then you had the unrest. Then you name them all. So I would say that in terms of getting to grips and dealing with these issues, we are making progress. We're making progress to rebuild the state capability. And of course, South Africans want it to be done yesterday. But it takes quite a lot of doing. We are rebuilding that capability in a number of state institutions. Even our state-owned enterprises, the process of repositioning them is ongoing, and it will take time. We dealt with COVID, and some people criticize the way we dealt with it, but at the same time we saved lots of lives. And many countries that faced the same challenges we did at the same time took a different path to disastrous outcomes for their people. And the reforms that we have embarked upon, some of them are in areas that should have been dealt with almost 20 years ago. Now we are dealing with them. And if you like, it has now become my problem. And I accept it as my problem, the problem of my presidency, which I've got to address. And I harness the strengths and the team and the people that I have at hand right now so that we can work together to correct all these things. So the challenge of unemployment, my dear brother, our economy has not been able to create the sufficient level of jobs for a very long time. And it continues to rise. 2008 was a defining moment when our job creation level started going down. Not 2018 when I came in, 2008. But this has been going on for the longest time. And we come in to this term at a time when the economic challenges that face our country, and indeed the world, have been on the rise. And I would say in many, many ways, we have done what we could to advance the interests of South Africans. You ask a question, or was it you, was it my earlier brother, on using state resources. I have no knowledge of that because even with this whole para issue, we left it to state agencies to do the work undisturbed, uninterrupted as much as they possibly could, and that's what has been the case without abusing state resources. Observance of the rule of law is rather important for me. It really is. And there needs to be a rule of law, and if we derelict that and we don't take it seriously, we are a country on a path that is completely wrong. What was the other question?
It was regarding the situation that faced the team of South African journalists.
Oh, yes. Yes, yes.
In Poland.
Yeah, in Poland. Yes, it is very concerning. Prior to all that news breaking out, we had had a meeting with the president of Poland, who had interrupted his holiday to meet us, and it was a courtesy call. I felt that we needed to go and pay a courtesy call to him, and also to say, as he had invited us to visit Poland, we have not been able to, we will do so. So it was a hello, courtesy call, and all that. And I got really concerned and disturbed when I had all these challenges that those who were going to travel with us, be they security and journalists, were not able to get passage through Poland. And on our side, the process of actually finding out exactly what happened is ongoing. So those discussions and fact-finding processes are ongoing, and I'm waiting for the report to be given to me. Was that the last question?
That was
President Putin, on how far are you with the engagement with President Putin?
I thought I had answered it in one shape or another. That it's not only President Putin, it's all the leaders of the BRICS countries. So how far am I? Ooh, how many meters is it there from here to there? So we are in those discussions. And as I said, once that is done, we'll be able to talk about BRICS and its impact and what it's going to do for our continent and our country, and also say quite a bit about what we are doing on the foreign policy side. If that was the end, can I ask my question? My question has to do with precisely this peace mission, because the sense that I got was that the international media saw this in a completely different light than the South African media. The South African media, and you were denied access, but so were many of them who actually commented, where the South African media was also very negative, very negatively disposed, and it was almost like, this is a non-event and so forth. And yet, in our view, it was quite historic that a group of African leaders would travel 3,000 kilometers or so to go to another continent to go and sue for peace. And yet here at home, why was it seen in such negative light? In terms of its historic importance and its political significance. And yes, admittedly, you address the important issue of not being able to be there, being trapped in Poland and all that, and obviously being very critical of that. And I did come out and said, I will want to make sure that when we travel with media, which I will want to do, I hope you come along, we should make all the necessary arrangements, because you have to do your work, and you have to give coverage, whether it's positive or negative. It matters very little to me, but all facilities need to be put in place for you to do your work. But my question is, why is it that there was so much negativity and no appreciation? Please answer me.
Yeah, Mr. President, about what you're consuming. Because that's where the answer lies. They're very divided as the media on this.
Joe, I didn't know that you were so decorum.
I request Cyril, who's raised perspectives around this question,
Yes.
Comrade President.
Yes.
And I wish to invite him to comment. And then I saw Kanita also was the first to raise her hand. So we'll take just those two. Maybe they will reflect the perspectives of other colleagues.
My view, Mr. President, on this particular matter, first and foremost, I agree with my colleagues. It's about who you consume.
Yeah.
Also,
It's not simple.
South African media has inadvertently and indirectly taken a posture when it comes to international global forces and dynamics. Some media houses are pro-Ukraine, some media houses are sadly or positively pro-Russia. But also, it's an issue of undermining African leaders and the role they play when it comes to geopolitics. And also, your government's lack of transparency when it comes to international relations policy and framework. For instance, your administration, Mr. President, has somewhat not been too open when it comes to your posture, when it comes to global politics. As I said earlier on, it's only now in your latter part of this administration that you are more forthright, more open on international relations, as opposed to yesteryear. But also, South African media, they always say in the newsrooms, if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't sell.
Yes.
And that's where the problem starts. Not only within the media space, but also within a governmental space. The disjuncture between the two has created a gap where only negative stories make it to the headlines.
Yeah.
And that is problematic. But also, the inefficiencies of the various administrations that have been in power have led to the media focusing on, if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't. Plain and simple.
Okay.
For the most part, not all of it.
I'll take that to Kanita. Good.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, the media landscape in South Africa is not monolithic, Mr. President, so it's difficult then to paint everyone with the same brush.
Okay.
When you talk about how international media positions this versus South African media, the reality of it is that there's a lot of really fundamental, serious problems that dog our government that creates this negative assertion that any positive sort of impact you seek to achieve on a national or at least national scale is not going to sort of filter down to the real-time challenges. And for example, when you see this kind of incoherence or this planning issues, it kind of is systematic of this government who's inefficient. So there's this thing, and you cannot blame an ordinary South African somebody to say, this government is battling to do basic things, water, sanitation. So why should we then care about what you do 3,000 kilometers away? Although me and you can agree that it has a fundamental consequence on it. Just another point to my colleague, I was in the US when this trip was happening, and obviously there's a different way the US media relates to geopolitics versus how we do. The reality of it is that the incoherence affects our reporting because we traveled to Dakar once and you were so stern in terms of the EU, for example. You echoed similar sentiments in Paris, right? But there's never an ownership of, we are doing this for this reason. So even with BRICS, we've all prompted you in that regard to say, tell us, what do you want, Mr. President? So there's never a world where we can go on television or in our forums to say, so President Cyril Ramaphosa as South Africa and we as South Africans owning a position, because there's this wishy-washy type of attitude. And so when someone comes to if a narrative says, why go and deal with Ukraine when you didn't deal with Sudan, or you don't deal with Mozambique, or you don't deal, those are valid questions. So I am intervening in Ukraine for X reason. I'm not putting resources in Sudan or for X reason, or I'm doing this to SADC in Mozambique for this reason. So there's that I think the communication is key. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Those were elevated responses. Those were elevated responses.
Very
I'm
good.
sure they covered everyone.
Very good.
But I do wish, before I hand over to the President, to just reflect on what has been said. I do wish to really thank members of the media for coming through, and also for projecting a culture of wanting to converse, because it's a two-way thing. We aim to work in a client-centric environment. You are primary clients, so we're going to be doing this work together. I will ask, though, that we keep light as possible. We don't shout at each other, we speak collegially, because it makes it for a much more collegial environment. But I do wish to thank everybody and for the questions posed to the ANC President. Over to you, President, and then you can just close us out as well.
Of course, thank you. Well, let me say thank you very much. I had occasion a few weeks ago to interact with many of your editors, or I don't know what you call them, in Cape Town. Was it Cape Town? No, it was in Pretoria. Sorry, it was in Pretoria. And Union Buildings. We had a really good exchange, though it was Chatham House rules, but it was an effort for them to get to understand some of the things that we are doing. And we gave them a fairly good and extensive presentation of the work that we are doing. And even I was impressed with some of the things that we've been doing, because we've been able to do things that have not been done for years, and which comes to the question of things have gotten worse, and indeed the situation that confronts us has made things really get worse. But the exchange was good, as this one was, and I'd like to thank you for being here. Sometimes it takes too long, and once it happens, I rather also enjoy it, although you are just too tough in your questioning. And when I leave, I always have scars on my back with the line of questioning. But I'd like to say, Mahlengi, that yes, we should do this a little bit more often. Time is always a problem, and we will try to find the time. And thank you very much for responding to my question, because I found your answers very enlightening. And in many ways, what you have said is quite true. And there are things that we also need to pay attention to, because as you say, and it is a fair criticism, that we have not always been forthright and forthcoming, and maybe we haven't really owned certain initiatives, and we need to be more upfront in owning them. So I take that to heart, and I thank you for that, because that is important feedback, at least for me, so that we know exactly how we can take things forward. It's actually also good advice. So you don't need to send your invoice, but I take it as good advice. So thank you very much. I've really liked this moment that we've spent with you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, you can selfie. Yes, you can selfie. Yes. Oh.
This guy